Welcome to The Real Story. I'm your host, Riley Lewis. Thank you for joining us. Are India and Pakistan on the brink of war? That's what it looks like as the tension between these neighboring countries rapidly escalates. It's a powder keg situation, in fact, and it stems from a deadly terrorist attack in the India-controlled region of Kashmir that happened back on April 22nd. Kashmir is a predominantly Muslim area, and all but one of the 26 victims who were brutally killed were Hindu tourists. This was also the deadliest attack seen in Kashmir in more than 2 decades. What's more, Indian officials blamed Pakistan for it. And 2 of the 3 attackers they've identified are Pakistani nationals, prompting India itself to accuse Pakistan of supporting the slaughter. Pakistan, however, denied these claims and called for a neutral probe into what happened. And now the clock is ticking as fears of a full-blown conflict between these nuclear-armed rivals grows by the minute. And on that note, Pakistan's information minister said his country has credible intelligence suggesting that India is preparing to take military action against them within the next 24 to 36 hours. And he said that on Wednesday, sending shockwaves through the entire region. Pakistan has also vowed to issue a decisive response to any aggression that is seen, with the country's defense minister warning of heightened military readiness right now. And while these reports about a looming attack might not be true, or at least not entirely so, tensions are certainly rising, as cross-border firing has already erupted along the line of control, which separates the Indian-controlled portion of Kashmir from the portion that is controlled by Pakistan. And India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has also given his military complete freedom to act if necessary. The diplomatic ties between these nations are rapidly unraveling, and Pakistan has even closed its airspace to Indian airlines. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called on both countries to de-escalate tensions, and he expects to meet with the foreign ministers of both countries sometime soon. It could even be as soon as today or tomorrow. And President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance condemned the attack as well, and Washington, D.C. has broadly expressed support for India, but they haven't criticized Pakistan, which is interesting. Once again, it's a textbook powder keg. And while the world watches that conflict very closely, there are some critical updates about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The Kremlin has come out and said that Russian President Vladimir Putin is open to peace with Ukraine. They said that on Wednesday. But the Kremlin also said it's difficult to achieve the rapid progress that the Trump administration would like to see. A spokesman for the Kremlin emphasized Moscow's preference for a peaceful resolution as well, but also insisted at the same time that Russia's objectives need to be met, whether it be through diplomacy or even through other means. It's also possible that Putin is simply looking to string the U.S. along to buy himself more time. President Trump even suggested as much in a recent post on Truth Social after meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Saturday. Moreover, Trump reiterated his thoughts about that meeting and Putin's position about peace on Tuesday night during an exclusive interview with ABC News.
It does feel like something's happening after that meeting with Zelensky in St. Peter's. You posted this on social media. There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas and cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe...
Well, that was part of my post, but you're right. That was a part of a post.
And yes. It says, it makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along.
Yeah, that's possible. Sure.
He might be...
He could be tapping me along a little bit. I would say that he would like to stop the war. I think that if it weren't for me, I think he'd want to take over the whole country, personally. I always felt. So when I left, there wasn't even a chance that this would happen. When Biden got involved, I won't say whether or not he handled it properly, but obviously it wasn't good because the war started. Putin went in, the war started. I believe that Putin wanted to get all of Ukraine once he went in. And I think part of the reason he went in, he saw what happened in Afghanistan, how incompetently Milley and all these guys handled that. It was one of the greatest embarrassments of our lifetimes, but maybe in the history of our country. Okay. So Putin went in. I think Putin wanted all of Ukraine. Right. I think if I didn't win the election, he would have gotten all of Ukraine. I think he would have taken all of Ukraine.
Well, that point leads us to Trump's answer to the most important question of all here. Does Vladimir Putin want peace?
You think Vladimir Putin wants peace?
I think he does, yes. I think
Still.
he does. I think
Even with the
of
raining
me,
missiles
I
on.
think he really, his dream was to take over the whole country. I think because of me, he's not going to do that.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And it's a fair question to ask, especially in light of the Russian drone attacks which occurred on Tuesday. At least one person was killed, and 50 more were injured in the attacks on 2 Ukrainian cities, according to Ukrainian officials. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia launched more than 100 drone attacks overnight, and he promptly called for more pressure to be placed on Russia in a post on X. He wrote, in part, quote, "Russian drones continue flying in the skies over Ukraine all morning, and so it goes every day. That is why pressure on Russia is needed. Strong additional sanctions that will actually work. It must be pressure, not just words or attempts at persuasion, that forces Russia to cease fire and end the war. Pressure from the United States, from Europe, from everyone in the world who believes there is no place for war on this planet. To protect our people, we need additional air defense systems that will make Russia's aerial terror impossible." End quote. Here with reaction is Davis Younts, a military defense attorney with Younts Law. Davis, thank you for being here.
It's an honor, Riley.
So I want to start with those remarks online from Zelensky. What do you make about his effort to drag the U.S. further into this conflict?
I think this has been his strategy from the beginning of this war, realizing that the only power to really check Russian aggression is the United States. So Ukraine has been wholly dependent both on the United States and on arms deals from the United States. So that's the balance that now Trump is facing. Trump is dealing with a complete and total mess. Half measures were taken during the Biden administration, supporting funneling money and arms into Ukraine, but not doing anything to decisively end the conflict, really prolonging the conflict. So that's the reality. That's the boots on the ground reality that we face now. So again, I think if Russia isn't willing to come to the table, if Vladimir Putin is not willing to negotiate in good faith, then 2 things will happen. I think the first solution is going to be sanctions, banking and other sanctions against Russia. I think that the Trump administration is willing to go that far. The unanswered question, and what Zelensky's talking about, is would the United States provide defensive weapons to Ukraine in order to force Russia back to the bargaining table? That's not something that I want us to do. I don't think that's something that the Trump administration wants us to do. But again, with the Biden administration, we were slowly moving towards offensive weapons and providing missiles, offensive missiles to Ukraine. And so this would be those options are on the table. But this would be a step I hope we don't have to take. Again, as I've said before, I think what we're looking at is Putin is trying to gain an upper hand in the negotiation. So he's doing everything he can right now to improve his hand when he comes to the bargaining table. And again, what his intent was in invading Ukraine in the first place, we don't know. But we know that the Crimea is going to be the primary issue for Russia. It has to be strategically for hundreds of years. The Crimea and access to those warm water ports have been critical for Russia's defense and for their place in the world. So that all is still going to be on the table. So it's a very delicate time we're dealing with. And again, it's a mess that was created and prolonged by the Biden administration. And it's interesting to see how it plays out, because what you do see that is so different is both sides are trying to anticipate and understand what it is Trump is going to be pushing them to do, and both sides are reacting to it and at least willing to come to the table, which was not something we saw before.
It's painful to think about this, Davis, but we had peace on the table 3 or 4 weeks after the initial invasion back in 2022, and then Secretary of State Antony Blinken basically downplays the validity of that deal and says we want more war, we want to push for the conflict and perpetuate this. And that brings us to this current situation. Putin knows that he could have crushed Ukraine militarily if it had just been between him and Kyiv. I'm not saying that's a good thing, not at all, but I think he's known from the beginning the U.S. has made this war possible and prolonged it in many different ways. And that makes it really hard for Trump, right, to come in as a neutral arbiter to try to negotiate an end to the war. So I want to ask you about this angle here. With Zelensky coming out and calling for war, or for more involvement, I should say, from Europe and from the U.S., what do you think that really does for the negotiation process itself?
So I don't think it does a lot. I think Zelensky has to be very, very careful. I hope he's learned his lesson in the way he's approached this, because I do think he was just getting terrible advice when he had that disastrous White House visit. Yes. I think the more recent meeting is hopeful. But again, we're looking at a scenario where the world knows and Russia knows that without the United States propping up Ukraine with billions and billions of dollars and yes. arms, yes. This war would not still be continuing. So it's an odd thing to come to the table and have the United States try to broker a peace when really they were on Ukraine's side. I mean, they were making the war possible. So it's a yes. very interesting position. Again, I have no sympathy for the Russians or Vladimir Putin, but from their perspective, they're essentially negotiating a peace deal that's being, where the arbitrator is someone who allowed the war to be prolonged. Now, it's a different White House, so it's impressive they're willing to do that. But that's the difference. So that's the complexity we're seeing here. So everything Zelensky says, I think can tip the balance, can upset Putin, can frustrate things further. So I just hope he listens to the president, the secretary of state, and not to mainstream media in the United States or to Europeans who can't bail him out if this goes badly regardless. Spot on,
spot on. Now, before we move over to India and Pakistan, one final thought about this. We have to talk about this territory issue for just a moment, because this conflict, it didn't really start in 2022. It came to a head with the invasion, but this goes back to 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. I don't know what the answer is to that question, and it really is so critical to the future of this negotiation process. So what do you think is the best approach here for settling some of those disputes about territory that's changed hands?
Again, we're trying to solve centuries-old disputes, yes. right? And sometimes I think we come at these issues with a bit of arrogance, thinking that somehow what generations before us could not solve, we can come up with an answer to. But again, it's going to have to involve free, clear access for the Russians to that warm water port. At least as long as Vladimir Putin is alive and in charge of Russia, he is not going to concede that. And again, from a national security standpoint, for Russia to exist as a sovereign nation, that is critical to them. Okay. The ability to have access to that remains critical to them. So it's always going to be on the table. It's always going to be an issue. Could there be some sort of multilateral agreement that allows access? I think that's possible, but none of this is going to be solved quickly, and it is not a simple thing to solve it given the centuries of conflict we've seen.
Okay, good point. Excellent point, actually. I wonder if that's dawned on the foreign policy machine in D.C., but let's move over now to India and Pakistan, because two nuclear-armed states, tensions are rapidly escalating. We had this horrific terrorist attack just last Tuesday. What do you make of that situation?
Listen, this is a really delicate situation that we're dealing with as well. And again, it sounds like I'm going to be on one note in this segment, but this is a region that's been disputed since 1949. This goes back to when the British control of India ended. Yes. Kashmir was an independent province that was given the opportunity to decide, are we going to be part of Pakistan, or are we going to be part of India? Although there was a small majority of Muslims in Kashmir, the decision was made by their leaders to join India. That has been disputed and been challenged in these regions ever since that moment. So there have been open and hostile wars. The difference now is that if India and Pakistan go to war, they are both nuclear powers. And so that is the biggest concern on the national and international stages. What will happen? Will they use nuclear weapons to do this? And that's all part of it. The other delicate part of this is Pakistan was an ally of the United States to a large extent when we were in Afghanistan, right, which was a change traditionally in our foreign policy. Typically, India was a close ally. Once again, India seems to be an ally against China and aligning with the United States in many areas. And then the final complicated factor in this dispute is a cultural and religious one. Yes. Pakistan is a Muslim country, and as a Muslim country, there are radical extremist Muslim terrorists throughout Pakistan. It's a segment of their population, and they're all going to continue so long as they adhere to their extremist beliefs. They're going to continue to carry out the murder of civilians, innocent people, tourists in this area. So those are complicating factors because religion absolutely plays a huge role in this.
Yes, it certainly does. So we'll have to see what happens. I'm really hoping and praying that things just calm down. I know Marco Rubio has called for de-escalation. We'll see if they heed those calls from him. But in the meantime, Davis, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Take care.
It's left to men like Davis Younts to fight for these Navy SEALs.
Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval